Well, this is the thing. I'm embarrassed to say that I watched this woman work from every angle, time and again, and I couldn't find anything amiss. I mean, I watched every move, and Lord knows I know pretty much every mind-reading and seance trick there is, but I couldn't find a flaw or spot a single suspicious move, and I began to doubt my own clear thinking. You know, I thought, maybe she's the real thing.
There is no real thing, Howard. It's all phony.
Stanley is enlisted by his friend Howard, a fellow illusionist, to debunk Sophie Baker, a young psychic medium's tricks. Set in the 1920s, the movie stars Colin Firth and Emma Stone in the lead roles. Magic in the Moonlight is a 2014 romantic comedy film, written and directed by Woody Allen.
In 1928, an illusionist, Wei-Ling Shu, performs in front of a crowd in Berlin with his world-class magic act. Sue is actually a British man named Stanley, who wears a disguise in his act. In his dressing room, he is greeted by an old friend and fellow illusionist Howard Birkin. Howard invites him for drinks and enlists Stanley to accompany him to French Riviera, where a rich American family, the Cartledges, has apparently been taken in by a clairvoyant, Sophie, and tells him how the son of the family, Bryce, is smitten with her. Howard explains he has been unable to uncover the secrets behind Sophie's tricks and is tempted to believe she really has supernatural powers. He asks Stanley, who has debunked many charlatan mystics, to help him prove she is a fraud. Howard and Stanley travel to the French Riviera, but they stop at Stanley's Aunt Vanessa's place first.
Over that.
And to what do I owe this unannounced visit?
I'm here to expose yet another fraudulent spiritualist, and I thought I'd warn you, I'll be dropping by for black pudding.
Oh, yes, the Catledges are holding seances up at their place. They've apparently met some gifted medium. It's the talk of the Côte d'Azur.
She's a little American called Sophie Baker, and apparently she's very sharp. But Stanley will get the measure of her.
I can't wait.
Stanley is introduced to the family, and then to Sophie and her mother. Though they find him to be obnoxious, yet Sophie still finds him appealing. In their first few encounters, Sophie begins revealing her ability to go into a fused state and apparently pulls out highly personal details about Stanley and his family.
Come, Stanley, let's go to it. You look stunned.
I had an uncle who drowned many years ago. When I mentioned him, she lapsed into a kind of fugue state and muttered death by water.
Well, she knew that my sister married on March the 7th to a bank manager. There's absolutely no way she could know that unless she...
Oh, not you two, Howard, no. I'll make short work of her tonight, during the seance.
Stanley witnesses the seance in which Sophie appears to communicate with the deceased patriarch of the Cartledge family. A candle floats up from the table, and Howard grabs it to try to discern what trickery is at play, but is astounded to find no apparent subterfuge. After the seance, Stanley is impressed but still not convinced, and Sophie reveals she knows who he is.
And I say you're Mr. Wei-Ling Shu.
And I say there is nothing you can do that I cannot duplicate.
Oh, I don't doubt it. You're great. But just because you can duplicate my miracles in no way proves that mine are not real.
The following day, when Stanley and Sophie visits his Aunt Vanessa in Provence, Sophie, seemingly able, upon holding Aunt Vanessa's pearls, to somehow relate secret details of Vanessa's great love affair. This finally convinces Stanley of Sophie's authenticity. He has an epiphany, realizing that his lifelong realism and cynicism has been misguided. When caught in a rainstorm, Stanley and Sophie take shelter at an observatory where Stanley used to visit as a child. After the rain subsides, they open the roof up and view the stars. They begin spending more time together, and Stanley opens up to all sorts of new possibilities. At a party, Stanley and Sophie dance. As they walk together later that night, Sophie asks him if he has felt any feelings for her as a woman.
As a woman? An odd question. I've never technically regarded you as a woman. You were a charlatan who turned the tables on me, and now I feel both humbled and proud.
You're proud of me?
You? No, I'm proud of myself for being big enough to admit that I was wrong and foolish all these years. I've been rather snobbish and rude, condescending about other people's faith.
Stanley is taken aback and admits that he has not thought of her in that way. She leaves upset. The next day, Stanley holds a press conference to tell the world that he, who spent his life debunking charlatan mystic, has finally come to find one who is the real deal. The conference is interrupted when he receives news that Aunt Vanessa has been in a car accident. Stanley rushes to the hospital and considers turning to prayer for solace. He begins to pray for a miracle to save his aunt, but is unable to go through with it as the rationality that has been his whole life comes back. He rejects prayer, the supernatural, and by extension, Sophie and her powers. He decides once more to prove she's a fraud. Stanley appears to leave the room after discussing it with them, but overhears Sophie and Howard discuss their collusion in what has been an elaborate ruse. Stanley then reveals himself.
Stanley, I can explain.
I watched you so closely. Howard watched your mother, but who watched Howard? You were free to rap on the table. You seized the floating candle, you swore there were no wires making it float, and I took you at your word. You were free to rap once for yes, twice for no, and when Sophie excused herself at my aunt's to make a telephone call, she called you, and you fed her information about my aunt. At first, I couldn't believe you would betray me like that. But, as you know, I am a misanthrope, and that people do unconscionable things does not run counter to my normal view of humanity.
Sophie is indeed a charlatan, and Howard had found out. Rather than unmask her to stop the ruse, he enlisted Sophie to help him one-up Stanley. Stanley is initially angry at Howard and Sophie, but decides to forgive them. In a conversation with Aunt Vanessa, who has recovered from her car accident, Stanley admits that he is in love with Sophie. He finds her and asks her to marry him instead of Bryce.
But the fact is, I love you. And somewhere in your confused black little criminal's heart, you care for me.
I'm marrying Bryce Catledge. You advised me to.
You must never take my advice. I'm a major eccentric.
You know, Bryce adores me, and he offers me a life of travel and excitement and high living.
No, he worships you, and you don't want to be worshipped. You'll be bored.
Sophie is taken aback and rejects his haughty, awkward proposal. Stanley meets with Howard and the two make amends. He then returns dejected to Aunt Vanessa. Stanley admits that he fell in love with Sophie at first sight, but she gave him no sign that she cared.
If she'd given me a sign, I'd have taken her in my arms, carried her off, and married her. All I was looking for was one sign.
He hears a knock, the same knock that indicates yes when Sophie conducted her seance. Stanley hoped that it is her and proposes once more without looking, and hears another knock, which indicates yes. He turns around, walks over to her, and they kiss.
Magic in the Moonlight is a whimsical and visually charming film that explores the themes of love, magic, and the mystery of the unknown, with Woody Allen's signature blend of comedy and romance. The movie offers a nostalgic and enchanting experience set against the backdrop of the Roaring '20s. 接下来我们揭晓今天的学习内容。To turn the tables is an idiomatic expression that means to reverse the situation, typically by gaining an advantage or changing the dynamic of a relationship or interaction. When someone turns the table, they shift the balance of power or control in their favor. For example, in a personal relationship, after a series of misunderstandings, he apologized and turned the tables by showing a more caring and understanding side. The phrase, "I took you at your word," is an expression that conveys the idea that the speaker believed and relied on the truth or sincerity of what someone said. When someone says, "I took you at your word," they are indicating that they trusted the information, assurance, or commitments provided by the other person. For example, "You promised to help, and I took you at your word, but you didn't show up." And that's it for this episode of Cinephile. You can find more on the FUNDAY website. Let's make every day a fun day.
Rested, I presume?
Yes, I had a bath. I had a little nap.
And now you're refreshed.
Well, no, not entirely. I had an unpleasant dream.
I've had my share.
I dreamt I was being followed by a sinister Chinese.
You have the Far East on the brain. What do you think it means?